Hello, this is Music Tech Help Guy, and welcome to episode 26 of my Logic Pro 10 video tutorial series. In this episode, we'll start working with MIDI, and over the next several episodes, we'll get pretty in-depth with MIDI recording, programming, and editing. I would like to just say up front that there's a lot of talking in this video because I want everyone to have a basic background on MIDI and how to set up MIDI devices before we start working with MIDI more in depth. So if you already have a good understanding of MIDI and the history and how to set up devices and things like that, you can pretty much move on to the next video or maybe just skip to the latter part of the video. Before we start working in Logic, let me give you a basic introduction to what MIDI is and some MIDI history. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface, and it is a computer language that was developed in the late 70s and early 80s by Sequential Circuits founder Dave Smith. Sequential Circuits was a company that developed synthesizers, and the reason why you don't really hear about them much anymore is because they were bought out by Yamaha in the 80s, the late 80s. And MIDI was commercially released to the public in 1983. So back in the 80s, MIDI was originally intended for keyboards and other hardware devices, and it allowed you to send musical data from one device to another, such as notes or controllers, controller data going from a MIDI controller to a hardware synthesizer. However, in the mid-80s, computer-based sequencing applications started to be developed. These computer-based sequencers allowed us to program and compose musical information and store that musical information on a computer rather than having to do it in real time or with a hardware device. And then what you can do is you can take that stored MIDI data on your computer and you could send it out to a hardware synthesizer. One of those early software sequencers from the mid-80s was called Creator, and this is actually a predecessor to Logic. Creator was developed by a German company called C-Lab and was available on the Atari ST system. They eventually added music notation functionality to it, and then they changed the name to Notator. Now, in 1993, some of the C-Lab programmers left the company to develop a new program, which was called Notator Logic, and it was developed from basically the Notator Creator platform, and they started their own company, a new company called eMagic. Now, later in the 90s, the name Notator Logic was shortened to just Logic, and eventually audio recording and editing functionality was added. And then later on, in 2002, eMagic was purchased by Apple, and the underlying programming for Logic was used to create Apple's free music app that we all know, GarageBand, while Logic has basically been maintained as a pro app ever since. Keep in mind that back in the 80s, software synthesizers were pretty much non-existent, and even in the 90s, hardware synths were still more prevalent. It really wasn't until the 2000s and the late 90s where software synthesizers really took over as the main type of synthesizer used in studio applications. However, some people still prefer to use their hardware synths. I have a few myself that I like to use from time to time. So not only does Logic have a great selection of stock software synths, especially for the $200 price tag, but it also has the ability to send messages out to hardware synths. You can get the best of both worlds, and you can do that via a MIDI connector, it's called a 5-pin DIN connector, or like a USB connector or another connector like Firewire or even Thunderbolt. So at this point in the video, I'm just going to give you a basic introduction on how to start working with MIDI, and we'll go over most of the other more advanced functions in later videos. The first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that our connected MIDI controller is being recognized by our Mac. If the computer doesn't see that your MIDI controller is connected, Logic isn't going to see it either. So the way you check this is you go up to your spotlight up here. It's the little magnifying glass thing. And what the spotlight does is it lets us search for files on the computer and search for apps on the computer and things like that without having to go search through other folders. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search audio MIDI, and we'll eventually see this that says audio MIDI setup. So we're going to click on that. And basically what the audio MIDI setup is it's a utility that allows us to see connected audio and MIDI devices. Now, for mine, it didn't. The window didn't pop up, but usually what'll happen is this window will pop up, your audio devices window. We don't want that. We want the MIDI devices. So the way you view the MIDI devices, you just go to Window and go to Show MIDI Window. And here's our MIDI window. So I'm just going to close out the audio window. So as you can see here, I have 3 different MIDI devices shown. The ones that are kind of grayed out here and here are ones that were devices that were connected at some point in time, but they are now disconnected or not being recognized. And this device, the CME UF MIDI device, this is a 88 key MIDI controller, keyboard controller that I've connected via USB cable. So if your device isn't showing up here, and mine is, if yours isn't showing up here, usually it's one of 2 things, one of 2 problems. The first is that if it's not showing up, you probably don't have the proper drivers installed for the device. Some devices you can just plug it in and it'll work right out of the box. Others you'll have to install the right MIDI drivers for the device. My CME keyboard is pretty old. It's from like 2002, 2003. And I had to go to the CME website to download the drivers. So if you don't see your MIDI controller here, the first thing to do is go to the manufacturer's website, download the correct drivers, install them, and then restart the computer and then check your audio MIDI setup one more time to see that it's there. If that doesn't do it, the second thing is that sometimes you can have the most current driver installed, but the device is still not shown. This usually means that the company that develops your MIDI controller does not have the correct driver available yet for the operating system that you're working on. This is one of the main reasons why most audio pros always stay one version behind on their OS. Although OS X 10.9 Mavericks came out earlier this year, I'm still actually running Mountain Lion because some of my devices and software aren't fully compatible with Mavericks yet. One of the big issues with Mac OS X was that when they went from Snow Leopard, which is 10.6, to Lion, which is 10.7, they went from 32-bit to 64-bit. Some companies never actually developed 64-bit drivers for their older devices, so this caused some external devices, including MIDI controllers and audio interfaces, to be obsolete. There is a bit of a workaround for this, though. You can actually hold down 3 and 2 on your keyboard and restart while restarting your Mac, and it'll restart the Mac in 32-bit mode. I had to use this workaround for my old Alessi interface until they created a 64-bit driver for it. Okay, now that we know that our MIDI controller is being recognized by our Mac, Logic 2 should be able to receive messages from it. So let's go back to Logic, and we are going to create a software instrument here. A software instrument track is a track that can receive a MIDI input and output an audio signal. So these are the main types of tracks you're going to want to use when you're using software synthesizers. External MIDI tracks input and output MIDI signals. So these are primarily used to send MIDI messages to external hardware synths, or maybe to rewire MIDI data to another application such as Ableton Live or Reason. So you're not going to be able to put an instrument on an external MIDI track, at least not a software instrument. So we're going to use a software instrument track. And by the way, we'll come back to external MIDI tracks later. For now, let's just create one software instrument track. Now, another thing to keep in mind here before hitting create is that if you check open library here, if this is checked, it's actually going to, by default, it's going to open up the media library here, but it's the instrument library here, but it's also going to automatically create a electric piano on that instrument. So it's a quick way to just open it up and test out your MIDI keyboard. So I'm just going to arm the track and let's see if we're getting sound. Yep, so sure enough, we are getting sound. If you don't want to start with an electric piano every single time, what you can do is go back and create a new track by clicking right here, or you can use the key command Option Command N, and then make sure that Open Library is unchecked. And what that'll do is it'll just create a blank instrument track, and it will have nothing assigned to it. So it's an instrument track. You can arm it. It'll receive signal, but you won't actually hear any sound because there's no instrument on it yet. So I'm actually just going to I'm going to keep both of these tracks, but what I'm going to do on my electric piano up here is I'm going to remove this channel strip setting from it and this preset from it. And the way you do that, and I'm just going to go ahead and close out my library here. The way you do that is you go over to your channel strip here, go to the very top tab here. This is your channel strip setting tab. Click and hold on it and go down to Reset Channel Strip. And now we have just a blank slate to work with. Okay. You can use the library to choose preset instruments. Most of these are just preset channel strip settings, like I said before. And if you don't know what a channel strip setting is, it's basically just a combination of a synthesizer plus all of its effects. I prefer not to use the library because it just opens up an extra window here on the left that just takes up more space. And by the way, the library in Logic 9 was on the right side, and they moved it to the far left on the in version 10. So if you're wondering where that went, yeah, it's over here now. So, okay, to test your MIDI controller, let me just choose a preset from right here for now. Let's use... we'll use synthesizer, we'll use a pad, and then we'll use Crystal Rain. Let's see what that sounds like. Close the library, and then arm the track, and it works. Now, another way you can check your to see that Logic is receiving MIDI is if you change your display up here to the custom view. What you'll see on the right side of the custom view is this no in, no out. What this is it's your MIDI monitor. If you play your MIDI controller, Logic recognizes the controller, you'll see the values that you play show up in the no in option up here. Now, I don't really want to hear that Crystal Rain track, so I'm just going to arm the blank one for now. So let me just zoom in on that, and I'll play a note here. I'll just play middle C. And sure enough, it says it recognizes that note when I play it. What you're seeing there is you're seeing the 1 is the MIDI channel you're on. C3 is the pitch that it is, the pitch, and then the octave. In Logic, middle C is C3. And then the 65, or the number appearing to the right of it, is the velocity, essentially how hard did you hit the key or how fast did you hit the key. So the other cool thing is if you play chords, it'll actually analyze the chords for you too. So even down to like 7th chords and other weird chords. So it's kind of like it's not really cheating, but it's a quick way to kind of see what chord you're playing if you're not sure what you're playing. So there you go. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and reset this channel strip, do the same way we did before. And so now we've got 2 blank instruments. The way I like to choose instruments is you click on the track, go to channel strip setting, go down to, and by the way, all these ones that you're seeing here, these are all ones that I've made. So these will be all the, your custom presets. We'll talk about how to make custom presets later, but most people, if you upgrade from Logic 9, you'll see this Legacy tab, and you'll be able to go in here and find any of the Logic 9 instruments. So let's say I want Logic, synthesizers, synth strings, and I'll use this one called Mayday Generation. It's kind of a nice sweeping pad. And there we go. If you didn't upgrade from Logic 9, or you're not seeing this Legacy tab down here, I believe the workaround is to go ahead and use the library. Logic 10 has some new instruments and presets, and these are all stored in the library as opposed to the channel strip tab. but you should see all of these different presets, these channel strip settings in the library, even if you don't see the legacy folder down here. So that's that. Okay, so I've chosen a kind of a synth pad. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to create kind of a drum instrument down here. And instead of using a channel strip setting, which, again, if I didn't say this before, it's a combination of the instrument and all of the effects added to the instrument, I'm going to just create a drum instrument without using a channel strip setting. So the way you do that is you go to your instrument tab right here, and you click on that, and you choose what software instrument you want to add to the track. Now, there's a whole bunch of them. Logic has pretty much one of the most impressive stock set of instruments that you'll find, especially for the price tag. And then if you have any like third-party stuff, they'll usually be down here under AU instruments. So like I've got some native instrument stuff down here. There's some more Apple stuff here as well. So if you have third-party synths, they'll usually be down there. So I'm going to use the instrument that's called Ultrabeat. It is a drum synthesizer, and we'll go a little more into Ultrabeat later. And then most of the synths allow you to load them in stereo, mono, multi-output, sometimes surround sound as well. So let's just load Ultrabeat in stereo. And what'll happen is the Ultrabeat plugin will just show up. Now, if you have the plugin window closed out and you want to open it up again, all you have to do is just click on the tab in the instrument tab here, and it'll pull it up. We can even do that for our channel strip setting up here. You can see that the instrument is the EXS24. You just click on that, and it pulls it up, and there's the instrument. So that's how you can actually open up the synthesizer window. Let me just rename this track to say Ultrabeat. There we go. Okay, now Ultrabeat, again, this video is not a Ultrabeat tutorial. It's just I want to get some quick music in here. What I'm going to do with Ultrabeat is within the Ultrabeat window, we can choose presets from right up here. So each of Logic's synthesizers and each of its effects plugins have this menu up there where you can choose built-in presets. So let me just choose a drum kit. Let's try Dub Smash. Sure, we'll use that one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use Ultrabeat's built-in pattern generator function, and you can get to that. It's just a step sequencer is all it is. And you can get to that by going down to Full View, and then you see the step sequencer, and you can play that preset sequence by pressing play right here. All right, now most of Ultrabeat's presets come with multiple patterns that you can choose from right here. Let me try a different one. Let's try pattern number 1. Okay, I'm going to use that one because it's a lot simpler. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go down here where it says pattern, and just to the right of that, there's a button. If you hover over that, it says drag to arrange window. So what you can do is you can just pull this pattern out here, and it automatically creates a MIDI region for us that contains a MIDI region version, a copy essentially of this pattern up here. So what I'm going to do now is in Ultrabeat, turn off the sequencer here. If you don't turn that off, you'll actually hear this sequence plus this one at the same time, and it'll continue to play even though the region, even if the region stops. So now I can close out my Ultrabeat window. I'm going to hover over the upper right corner just to loop this out a bit. I'll loop it out 4 times, and I'm just going to start it on start the whole thing here on measure 2 instead of measure 1, just to give myself a little space. Okay, so now I've got this drum pattern out here. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to record with just some chords with my Mayday generation instrument. I'm going to go ahead and pull the volume down just a little bit on that. And let's give this a shot. Now, to record MIDI, it's basically the same as recording audio. You hit R to record, or you can hit the record button up here in the transport. So I'm just going to play in a few chords. And there we go. One of the things that we can do with MIDI that we can't really do as easily with audio is we can very, very easily go in and edit the individual notes that we played in our recording. We can do things like quantize, where we can do rhythmic corrections. We can change pitch. We can change the length of notes. We'll go over some of the other editing functions in a later video, but I do want to show you how to just kind of get into a MIDI region and just do some basic editing on the notes. So what I'm going to do for now is double click on this MIDI region to open it up in the piano roll editor. And the piano roll editor shows up down here. A piano roll editor is essentially a matrix style editor that lets you see piano on the left and then time left and right. So basically pitch is vertical and time is horizontal. There's also a score editor. There's a step editor as well. These we'll come back to in future videos. So for now, we'll just use the piano roll editor. The way I actually like to see piano roll is I like to have it in its own window. So what I'm going to do is hit Command 4, and Command 4 opens up the piano roll editor. Piano roll used to be Command 6 in Logic 9, but if you're using the newest key command set for Logic 10, it's now Command 4. And if you forget that, you can always get there just by going to Window, Open Piano Roll. So there we go. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is you'll see that the piano roll editor, like all of the editors in Logic, it has its own zoom controls. It also has its own edit tools over here. So I'm just going to zoom out a bit so I can see this. And actually, some of the zoom key commands that we talked about earlier also apply here. So if I click on the background, hit Z, it'll actually zoom everything to fit the window. Now, there's a few mistakes I made here. Right here, I've got two notes that are overlapping. I want to shorten this upper note so that they're not overlapping. And I also played a C down here when I wanted it to actually be a B. So these are two really basic edit functions that we can do with the pointer tool. So just make sure that your left click tool is set to the pointer tool. The first is we can trim a note just by hovering over the right side or left side of a note. We can just pull that in. And by the way, when you click on a note, it plays the note for you, so you hear the note that you're playing. If you want to turn that off, you just turn off this MIDI out button up here. It's green, and when it's off, when you drag over a note, you won't hear anything. And then this C here needed to be a B, so I need to lower that down a half step. You can actually just click on the note and drag straight down. But there's also a little key command for this. If you hold Option and press up or down, you can shift the note up or down by one step at a time. And the other thing you can do, I'm just going to hit Command A to select everything, is you can shift notes or a note or multiple notes up or down an octave by pressing Shift Option up or down. So this was kind of low. I played it kind of in the wrong octave. I want it to be one octave higher. So I'm going to do Shift Option up, and then it'll shift it up an octave. All right. Another thing that we might want to do here is correct the timing of our recording. If I zoom in, you'll see that pretty much all of the notes are slightly ahead or slightly behind the grid. What we're going to do is we are going to quantize our MIDI notes to snap to the nearest grid value. That's what quantization is. It's essentially the rhythmic correction of notes. Now, we'll go pretty deep into quantization later, but for now, what we're going to do is I'm just going to quantize to a really basic value. And someone asked in one of the previous videos, hey, how do I know what quantization value to use for my music? Well, there's really no way to tell other than understanding your own music and having a little bit of rhythmic and music theory knowledge. So if you don't understand rhythm, you're basically just playing a guessing game as to what value to quantize your music to. I just happen to know here that my shortest, and you always quantize to your shortest value. So I know my shortest value here was a half note, so I'm just going to hit Command A to select all, go over to time quantize here, and I'm going to choose a half note. Now there's other things in here like triplet values, swing values. We'll come back to those later, and hopefully I can answer some of your questions in a later video on quantizing. So for now, just kind of stick to this top area here. So I'm going to choose half note, and you'll see all of the notes now snap to their nearest half note. Okay, So that's all fine there. Let me just close that out. In the very first episode, I also showed you that you can quantize an entire region of music to one value by just going over to, or by opening up your inspector, going to the region parameters, and going to quantize. There's no need to do both ways. If you quantize in piano roll, that's fine, or if you quantize out here, that's fine. One or the other works. So let's see what this sounds like and see if everything sounds okay. All right, that sounded okay, but I think the keyboard's a little too high. I'll pull that down. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually remove this delay effect on the track. And so the way you can do that is you can just turn it off by clicking here, or you can just click on the right side and choose no plugin. And instead of delay, you know what? I think I want a reverb plugin. So I'm going to go to reverb. We'll use Space Designer. Add a bit of, just add a preset from up here. Just, let's use a plate reverb. We'll use, sure, we'll try this one. By the way, this is what I was talking about before. Pretty much all of Logic's plugins and synthesizers have a presets menu up here that you can choose from. So even if you don't know how to use the plugin properly, you can still use the presets and use that kind of as a starting point. Now, let's say I want to use this because I customized the instrument now. I'm not changing the way that preset is stored on the computer. I've just created my own instrument now. What if I want to store this for later and save this instrument for later? What you can do is you can go to the top tab here, click and hold, and go down to Save Channel Strip Setting As. And what you can do is type in the name that you want this to be called. So I'm just going to call this, I'll call it Josh's Custom Strings. There we go. And now when you click on that top tab and scroll down, you'll see that instrument show up in your channel strip settings here, along with my other custom instruments that I've made. By the way, you can also create folders here as well. If I do go back to Save Channel Strip Setting As, you can say New Folder. And I'll just call it New Folder for now. And you can save the instrument inside that folder, so you can kind of categorize your instruments like I have here. I've got them sorted by instrument type, and then it opens up another menu where you can kind of, you know, see all of the instruments in that folder. So now in New Folder, I have an instrument called Josh's Custom Strings. So there we go. So that concludes this introductory video to MIDI and Logic, and in the next several videos we'll start talking about MIDI editing, sequencing, programming, quantizing, and other more advanced functions as well. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.